What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Luke J. Gagnon, filling in for Real American Politics. And what is going on, Real American Patriots? I thought today would be a good time to kind of make a video on the situation that is kind of going on with the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, basically explaining real quickly what is happening with it. Has Donald John America betrayed the base because of the situation he has been put in with this situation where now we are giving weapons to Ukraine to continue the war going on there? I'm going to explain my opinion. Keep in mind, this is coming from me, who's someone who is very much so on the sort of detente side of things. I think it would be very good if the United States has open relations, open dialogue with the Russians, the Chinese, even the Iranians. I think we should have diplomatic relations with everybody. I think we should try to wind down conflicts. We should try to avoid war as much as possible. Try to have better relations, including with countries we perceive to be our adversaries. That is my honest position on this stuff. So just going into it, keep in mind that is where I'm going to be coming from on this. And obviously, my position on this do not represent the opinions of everyone in the rap sphere. You're free to disagree with some of my opinions. And I'm going to be explaining why I think, even though I hold those opinions, I think it makes diplomatic and political sense for Donald Trump to be moving ahead with the Ukraine weapon shipments and things like that. Even though I think ideally we wouldn't be in this situation, but we are. And first of all, let's go to this. We have to realize that this is a conflict that Donald Trump is going to. It was going to be very hard to end it from the outset because this is not a conflict like Israel and Iran that you could just like. That one was pretty quick. You were, well, obviously it's not long term address, but like that spat is not like it's something that could have been resolved relatively quickly. This Ukraine situation is a bit more complicated, though, and it's something that almost, if you wanted to prevent it, it had to be prevented earlier. But obviously, when the war began, we did not really have competent leadership. We had leadership from the Biden administration who basically cut off all ties with Russia after the invasion happened. Just think about that. When Biden was in office, we had no diplomatic following the invasion. We had no diplomatic relations with the Russians for 3 years, for almost 3 years until Donald Trump came back into office. Think about that. Even during the most tense moments of the Cold War, there was a direct line in the White House that went to the Kremlin. We didn't have that under Biden. Biden didn't speak to Putin for 3 years. The only time America and Russia began building up some form of diplomatic relations was after Trump was brought back into office. So that alone is a big win. The fact that we now have a president who's willing to speak with the Russians, who's willing to even come to the negotiating table and get these deals. But now let's explain the part that really is the case. Now, if Donald Trump were to have won in 2020, I don't think Russia would have invaded Ukraine. And it's not because of the old thing that Russia would have been afraid of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. I just think Trump would have been able to negotiate something because this is a war that ending is going to be a hassle. And I'll explain why. First, we're going to take a look at the Russian perspective on this war, which there's some debate. Obviously, some people on the left who are on the more anti-Russia side seem to think that Russia is just invading this because he's Hitler and he wants to do an invasion of Europe. Um, I disagree with that strongly. I think it's pretty clear that the main reason that the Russians are invading Ukraine right now is that they fear there being another NATO country directly on their doorstep, which Ukraine poses. And what would happen right now? Should that deal be made, Ukraine in the West would be allowed to exist as a country that has heavy ties to the West. Maybe they wouldn't officially be able to join NATO or the EU, but they would still have very heavy ties to the West. You can guarantee there would be a strong Western ally when it comes to international resolutions, when it comes to all this stuff. And the Russians don't really want that. The Russians already have three, now four NATO allies on their border, the Baltic states as well as the uh, country of Finland, which recently joined NATO and has been in the EU for some time. And the Russians really do not want another country like that on their border. And obviously, look at from the Ukrainian perspective, Ukraine is not going to surrender three provinces, which that's basically needed for Russia to do anything. You're going to need to give up the Donbass. You're going to need to give up Crimea, but Ukraine really isn't ready to do that. So you have two countries who are refusing to kind of back down. And that puts Trump in this odd situation because either he could just stop delivering shipments to Ukraine at all, in which you would anger Europe, because Europe, if America just gave up on this conflict, you would have Europe frankly give up on America. You've already seen people like the Spanish Prime Minister, who's I've got a lot to say on him, Mr. Sanchez, but we're not going to say it here. Who is already trying to like kind of craft better relations between the EU and China, and you would often end up pushing a lot of these countries in Europe to China. And that's something that a lot of people I know would not really like. But that's one thing. If Trump were to just say, yeah, no more aid, we're not going to give any more aid to the Ukrainians, that is going to anger Europe. That's going to anger all these NATO countries. And it's important, I think, to have a good relationship with the Europeans because that's who we're closest to in the world. This idea of isolationism fully cutting ourselves off from the global stage, it's just not realistic. And I know there's a lot of issues with NATO, like the fact that in the past they've kind of like taken advantage of us in terms of us funding their stuff. But take a look what happened this year. Donald Trump managed to get a program that pretty much every NATO country besides Spain, again, goes to show how shitty their prime minister is, basically got them to all raise their defense spending to 5%. And that's something that all these European countries are now working towards. And that's a net positive. Mark Rutte, who's the current Secretary General of NATO, is also a big proponent of this plan. So you're already seeing Trump kind of get this way to kind of like get NATO to pay their fair share. And another thing, too, NATO is going to be the one who's buying the weapons. We're the ones manufacturing it, but it's going to be paid for by NATO. So all these other European countries will be buying the weapons from us to give to the Ukrainians. So obviously, someone like me, I want to see this war end. I don't want to see us in a perpetual Cold War state with the Russians or the Chinese. But it comes to a point in time now where it's if we just abandon Ukraine, if we just say abandon NATO and all this stuff, it is going to be a bad look for this country, especially when it comes to our allies. And I know a lot of people are like, who cares about these countries? They just rip us off. And that is the case in the past. But like I said, we are seeing there being a bit of a work towards better kind of funding from these European countries. I know Poland for the past couple of years has hit their designated target. But like outside of that, most countries aren't really doing their fair share. And now you're seeing a bit more of a push to do that. And I think that's good. I think it's very good that we're going to start seeing this take place. So now at this point, what do I see as the best possible ending for this? And the truth is, there really isn't any. I think this war, like I said earlier, is just in such a horrible predicament due to Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 election. Had Trump been president, like I said, we probably wouldn't be talking about this because you probably would have gotten a deal figured out before a war broke out. But obviously, we had Joe Biden who didn't understand the Russians and really had no interest at preventing a war in the region. So what I think needs to happen at this point is continue this system we have now where the Ukrainians give them aid and whatever, or where the Europeans give the Ukrainians like weapons and stuff that we produce but they pay for. Continue negotiations with the Russians, but it's really just an unwinnable situation. It's very sad that Trump has been put in this situation where you have to deal with this conflict that essentially has no realistic end as of now. Eventually, Russia is probably going to have to sue for peace if it keeps destroying their resources like that. But we'll have to wait and see. Again, that's kind of optimistic thinking, but we can't really think like that. We have to think like this is going to last a while, and unfortunately, it probably will. The idea that Trump was going to be able to easily come into office and end this war is pretty clearly not coming to fruition. That's an issue. That's something that hopefully we can get fixed, but only time will tell. But as always, guys, Thank you for tuning into the video. Hope you had to enjoy what I had to say about foreign policy, kind of giving my 2 cents on the Ukraine situation. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to check out my Twitter, John Rose's Twitter, Real American Politics Twitter. I believe John Rose will be back with a live stream tomorrow. Could be wrong, though. But as always, guys, thank you for watching, and Godspeed to all of you.